Here we go. Record to club.
Okay, so it looks like it's actually 1:03. Great, and we have a bunch of people logged in. Excellent. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Julie Wood. I'm the Deputy Director with the Charles River Watershed Association. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. We have a really great program, as you know, really great speakers. So we will get right to it. Oops, a little too far. All right, so welcome to Managing Stormwater MS Permit Workshops, primarily for our Charles River municipal partners. We have a great lineup of, a great agenda and a great lineup of speakers today. I am going to actually stop sharing my screen so you can see everyone while I introduce them all. Our first speaker today is Newt Tedder. Many of you know Newt. Newt is an environmental scientist at EPA Region 1. Newt holds a master's degree in geology from Boston College, specializing in surface water and groundwater contamination due to rolled salt application. Newt has over 15 years of experience in hydrology and hydrogeology in the public and private sectors, where he has worked developing public water supply, tracking surface water pollution, and most recently, regulating surface water contamination due to stormwater through MS4 permits. Newt has been at EPA Region 1 for 9 years and currently serves as the lead permit writer for Massachusetts Municipal Stormwater Sewer System, or MS4 permit, and the Massachusetts DOT Separate Storm Sewer System, or TS4 permit. Great, so glad to have Newt. Also joining us today is Andrew Goldberg. Andrew is an environmental scientist and planner at Kleinfelder with 5 years of professional experience in water resource planning. He has worked with several communities in the Charles River watershed to develop stormwater management asset management and climate preparedness programs. Mr. Goldberg completed his undergraduate degree from Lafayette College and is currently pursuing a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University Whitting School of Engineering. We're also joined by Jim McKay. He serves as the Town of Millis Department of Public Works Director, where he's worked for over a decade. As the department director, he manages daily operations and water, sewer, stormwater, and highway infrastructure. He establishes and maintains budgets for the department, oversees capital and improvement projects, and maintains public communication with town ratepayers. He was instrumental in leading the implementation of the town's stormwater utility. Prior to his role in Millis, Jim worked at the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. And of course, Millis, one of our municipal partners, so great to have Jim providing that municipal perspective today. And last but certainly not least, we have Paige Dolci. She's Mass Audubon Central Metro West Regional Coordinator for the Shaping the Future of Your Community program. Her primary role is performing outreach and providing technical assistance to municipalities with high rates of development in support of sustainable planning and nature-based solutions for climate resilience. Through previous roles like TerraCore Land Stewardship Coordinator with Sudbury Valley Trustees, she has experience engaging local communities and organizing on topics like open space protection and urban pollinator habitat. Paige studied environmental science and policy at Boston University. All right. So you can see why we're so excited to have such a great lineup of impressive speakers. I just have a few intro slides, and then I will turn it over to this great group. Okay. And just again, for the record, I am Julie Wood, the Deputy Director at Charles River Watershed Association. So everybody's going to give a presentation, but then we will have time at the end for Q&A. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any time, and we'll so type it in when you think of it, and we will answer those at the end. I'm guessing this is not your first webinar, but in case it is and you're having any technical troubles, feel free to use the chat or email Nishayla. She's our host for the event. There's her email address, nporter@CRWA. So if you're having any technical difficulties, she's your go-to woman and can help you out. As I said, feel free to type your question in as it occurs to you. Don't feel like you need to hold it off. Please introduce yourself in the chat box. It's great to see who's here, see who's joining us, and you can all get to know each other virtually. We are recording today's session, so we've been recording from the start. So if you have colleagues that couldn't make it, just let them know they can catch the recording afterwards. And we are going to include some related resources on our website, including the recording and the slides. So those will also be accessible to you after this. So our goals for today really are to focus on the requirements in Appendix F, since those are something that apply to all our Charles River municipal partners, but don't necessarily apply to every community statewide, so may not have been a function of other MS4 discussions that you've been to, but certainly very relevant and something that is good to get the conversation going on today, since some key benchmarks of what communities are required to do in Appendix F, which focuses on the phosphorus control plans, are coming up. And so Newt's going to walk us through the phosphorus control plans a bit, and then we're going to have some information on the Millis's experience with funding, and then Paige is going to talk about her experience helping communities with some of that legal review, so that they can be ready to implement all the stormwater management that is needed according to the permit. Hopefully this was clear from the invitation, but this is not a webinar on the amended permit that is currently out for comment. If you have questions on that, that would be better to take to a different forum, since we're not going to be focusing on that today. Hopefully Charles River Watershed Association is known to many of you. We're one of the oldest watershed associations in the country, founded in 1965. We have a very interdisciplinary staff and work on an integrated approach to solve urban water management problems. We work closely with EPA as well as the state agencies and all of you in our 35 partner municipalities. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of background. I know many of you have been working on Charles River issues longer than, or quite just as long as CRWA and EPA. But just as a reminder, we do have two what are called total maximum daily loads for nutrients for the Charles River. We have two because the geography is a bit different. One focuses on the upper and middle watershed, while one focuses on the very urban lower watershed. TMDLs are essentially pollution budgets, tell you how much pollution do you have compared to how much should you have, and lays out a plan for how you might get to where you should be. So the Charles River nutrient TMDLs identified phosphorus as the nutrient of concern and identified stormwater as the primary source. That is the primary way that phosphorus gets into the Charles River. So the TMDL is now being implemented through the Massachusetts MS4 permit. As again, many of you know, in 2016, a new permit was issued. It was postponed for 1 year, but did go into effect in 2018. And in 2019, I'm sure all of you on this call know that your year one reports were due and you got them in. And of course, now 2020, our the year two reports will be due shortly. As I already referenced, there is also an amended permit that's out for public comment, but again, not our focus for today. So stormwater issues, again, most of you know what we have in the Charles. Not always the most visible or, most obvious concern, perhaps, of residents, but they do affect our lives. You can see these photos here in the Charles River Lower Basin and in other areas. We do get cyanobacteria blooms almost every summer. We have issues with invasive overgrowth or just overgrowth of nuisance vegetation, and of course flooding. Stormwater flooding is a challenge that many of you face due to the high levels of impervious cover that we have throughout the watershed. And unfortunately, we see a lot of potential for that to become even more of an issue because of the expected impacts for climate, both in the sense of extreme rain events and heat as well. So some of the things that we'll be talking about today are opportunities to use your stormwater management program to help you achieve multiple goals, including adapting to climate change and addressing your stormwater needs. So that is it for background, and now I will hand it over to Newt.
All right, thanks, Julie. Okay, so I'm going to be going through the TMDL requirements and the MS4 permit for Massachusetts. As Julie mentioned, all these requirements are contained in Appendix F of the 2016 Massachusetts MS4 permit that is currently in effect and affects all of the communities in the Charles River watershed. I'm going to go briefly through some of the TMDL overview, just some brief background on how those TMDLs got into the MS4 permit. And then I'm going to go through just the phase one of the phosphorus control plan requirements in Appendix F, because that is our first phase affecting the next 5+ years of implementation and where everybody should be focused right now. And then I'm going to go through phosphorus reduction credits, so the things that everybody can be doing and be aware of that are available for communities to take advantage of for phosphorus reduction credits to meet those requirements contained in the MS4 permit. Okay, so we've got two phosphorus TMDLs, as Julie mentioned. There's the upper at Middle Charles TMDL and the Lower Charles TMDL. The Lower Charles was completed in 2007, and the Upper Middle was completed in 2011. It is a really urbanized watershed for the most part. We have 35 cities and towns. It's 308 square miles, and it covers about 900,000 people in population, a little bit more now. So that number is a little bit old. But this is a pretty urban watershed. And as Julie mentioned, the main source of phosphorus that's impacting the Charles River throughout the entire basin is stormwater. Over 70% of the problem is due to stormwater. And therefore, the TMDL is really focused on that particular source of phosphorus, where those sources were coming from, what land use areas were contributing the most, and what those reductions needed to be to meet our TMDL goals. The Lower Charles was the first of the TMDLs to go in 2007. Each TMDL needs to include what's known as a waste load allocation. So any permitted source, any National Pollution Discharge Elimination System or NPDES permitted source has to have a waste load allocation in any EPA approved TMDL. That waste load allocation is what that source needs to reduce their discharge of that particular pollutant down to in order to meet water quality goals. So for instance, the Stony Brook watershed has an existing load of 5,123 kilograms of phosphorus per year discharged into Stony Brook. Their waste load allocation was 1,950 kilograms per year. So that means that you have to get from their existing load down to their waste load allocation in order to meet their water quality targets. And once we have a TMDL with a waste load allocation for particular NPDES permitted sources, any permit issued to those sources needs to contain that waste load allocation and measures that are consistent with the TMDL and that waste load allocation to ensure that those discharges meet water quality. Both upper and middle Charles TMDL and the lower Charles TMDLs went through the amount in kilograms per year of total phosphorus that needed to be removed from multiple different sources throughout the watersheds. They also provided a waste allocation in the form of a % reduction from that particular source. Also, the TMDLs broke down even further the waste allocation into particular land use groups and assigning different reduction percentages to those land use groups in order to meet water quality goals. The lower Charles TMDL was it was a much tighter area. It is highly urbanized. It contains mostly Boston, Cambridge, a bit of Somerville, some of Watertown, some of Newton, some of Waltham. So that TMDL is a very hyper urban environment, and they just assigned the same waste load allocation to each land use. So if each land use that was contributing phosphorus to the Charles River was to reduce their phosphorus loadings 62% per year, the lower Charles would meet the goal. The upper and middle Charles broke it down a little further than the lower Charles TMDL and assigned different reduction percentages to different land use groups. So you can see here that commercial, industrial, high density residential, and medium density residential and highways all got the same 65% reduction. As Julie mentioned, commercial, industrial, high density residential are our main sources of phosphorus throughout the watershed, and it is therefore why they get the highest percentage of reduction required. The TMDL also broke down required percentage reductions to different land use groups that have smaller percentage loading, such as agriculture, open space, and low density residential. All received slightly lower percent reductions required to meet water quality goals. So because both TMDLs broke down the waste allocation into different land use types, we were able to take the way that the waste allocations were produced and reproduce them on a town-by-town basis for the MS4 permit. So for instance, Bellingham, this is just a snapshot, Bellingham, Belmont, Boston, they were all broken down into the types of land use within their jurisdictions. And we applied total phosphorus loading rates to each one of those land uses that are consistent with the TMDLs, and then applied the waste load allocation in the percent reduction required for each one of those land use groups consistent with the TMDL in which that land fell. So for instance, Boston would need a 62% reduction from all of the commercial, industrial, high density residential, and so on land use types within their jurisdiction, where Bellingham would have to get a 65% reduction from commercial, industrial, high density residential, but for instance, low density residential was assigned a 45% reduction, all consistent with the TMDL's recommendations for the waste load allocation. So the entire watershed was broken down using a GIS analysis into different land use groups based on the 2005 land use data on MassGIS. We then assigned those, the phosphorus loading rates and percent reductions to come up with community-specific waste load allocations that were included in the 2016 MS4 permit. The numeric reduction requirements in the MS4 permit look like this. We break them down into pounds per year. I think there's also a kilograms per year table in there as well. But we provide the baseline, which is consistent with the TMDL, or but it is specifically for the stormwater component of the TMDL, so it may look just slightly different. We have a reduction required, and that is taking directly from the TMDL the percent reduction requirements and applying that to the land use and the loading rates for your particular community, and the overall calculated percent reduction required for that particular community. We'll see we have a community table here and a regulated area table here, and we'll be getting into that in a little bit. The permit contains a long implementation schedule for full implementation of the Appendix F requirements for the Charles River TMDLs. The permit anticipates complete adherence to the waste allocation within a 20-year timeframe, but offers a significant ramp-up time and significant work at the end. This was done very deliberately to allow for a lot of planning upfront and breaking up the work into different phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, corresponding to 5-year increment periods for implementation. Our hope here was to have a really deliberate process by each community to take this seriously, give them enough time to put all of the correct mechanisms in place to allow them to do it successfully, and have a successful program over the next 20 years so we can eventually meet water quality throughout the Charles River watershed. Today, we're just going to be focused on the first 5 years of implementation. So this is phase 1. So phase 1, the phase 1 PCP or phosphorus control plan needs to be completed over the first 5 years of the permit term and then implemented over the next 5 years. So while the permit term only lasts 5 years for an MS4 permit, the schedule in this MS4 permit goes out beyond the term of the permit and remains enforceable until a new permit is in effect. The phase 1 includes a lot of different components. So this is much bigger than the phase 2 and 3 requirements, just because, again, we're talking about a very deliberate process, hopefully laid out in specific pieces over the course of 5 years to end up with a comprehensive phosphorus control plan after 5 years that can be implemented by each municipality over the next 5 years of implementation. I'll be going through each one of these pieces today, just touching a little bit on what we are expecting out of each one of these pieces, and I'll go through them as far as when they are due. The first one is their legal analysis, and hopefully everybody that is covered under this permit has already completed this. If not, you've got 1 month left to go. Annual reports are due for year 2, or they are due September 30th of this year, and they cover the reporting period that ends June 30th. So year 2 of the permit term ends June 30th, and the legal analysis for all Charles River communities for their phosphorus control plan needs to be done by year 2, and they'll be reporting on their legal analysis in this year's annual report. What is a legal analysis? This is really a pretty open-ended piece, so this shouldn't have been a very big lift by year 2. It is really for the municipalities or permit holders to look inside and see if they have the correct ordinances in place. Do you need additional ordinances? Do you think you will need additional ordinances to implement your phosphorus control plan? Do you have easements that are necessary for operation and maintenance authority, for instance? Do you have the correct legal authority for to help with anticipated funding mechanisms? Or are there any other legal authorities that you think you may need that will help you deal with the phosphorus loadings that are coming from private property owners that are entering your system? And if so, the analysis requires you to identify those and begin to implement those to get those authorities in place as soon as possible. The next is our funding source, and Andrew and Jim will be talking about their dip into the funding source of a comprehensive stormwater plan right after me. But this funding source assessment for all communities in the Charles River watershed needs to be done by year 3. And this really is trying to lay the groundwork for a successful implementation of a program. It requires you to look at your current funding mechanisms, choose a funding mechanism that you'll be using to fund this program, and just describe that funding mechanism. If the funding source assessment comes out when you realize that this is going to cost your municipality more than you can fund through the general fund, then the funding source assessment requires you to go ahead and begin adopting any other source of funding that you deem necessary to meet the requirements of the phosphorus control plan. And many communities in the Charles River watershed are looking at, and across the state actually right now, adopting enterprise funds or stormwater utilities in order to fund comprehensive stormwater management in their towns. In Massachusetts, since 2016, we have doubled the amount of enterprise funds in the state, and they continue to grow every year as communities learn more about and continue to do really good stormwater management, as well as trying to tackle the impacts of climate change and flooding that are coming with that are hitting all municipalities, especially with old infrastructure that now needs replacing. So comprehensive stormwater funding is important across the state, and it's especially important in the Charles River watershed to deal with implementing a successful phosphorus control plan. So that funding source assessment and beginning to adopt any other funding mechanisms is due by year 3. Year 4 is a choose your scope year. The Appendix F requirements for the Charles River watershed are a bit unique in that they allow a choice in year 4 by all communities that are regulated underneath this permit. And the choice is based on whether you want to deal with just the phosphorus coming from your regulated area, or do you want to deal with the phosphorus reduction requirements townwide. And so the communities need to choose based on where they're going to implement their phosphorus control plan and submit that choice to EPA in year 4. So what does regulated area mean versus jurisdictional area? So for instance, if we look at Bellingham here, and our regulated area map is that shaded in red, and the unregulated area is those holes, those donut holes within that red shaded area. Under MS4 regulations, only discharges from or originating from or through that regulated shaded area require a NPDES permit. Those discharges that are outside of what is known as urbanized area, according to the US Census, does not need a permit, so is not subject to MS4 permit requirements. However, the MS4 permit in Appendix F allow the community to make a choice that for themselves on where they want to implement their phosphorus control plan, and that choice comes with different loading rates and different requirements. So if a community chooses just to work within their regulated area and they're only going to be controlling the phosphorus that's coming from their regulated area or urbanized area, that generally has a lower total phosphorus reduction requirement placed on the municipality or the permit holder. However, only structural and non-structural controls done inside that regulated area can be counted towards that load reduction. So there needs to be additional accounting on the part of the permit holder to be able to carve out where they're street sweeping, where they're catch basin cleaning, where the structural controls are being done, in order to only count those controls that are being done in the regulated area towards their reduction targets. The regulated area scope also allows permittees to submit updated land use information in year 5 of the permit term, as well as updated catchment information to refine the TP reduction targets in the next permit term. And what that means is you can submit land use information and catchment information that will potentially carve out additional sources of total phosphorus for us to have to deal with in another way. Therefore, your total reduction requirement may go down if you submit refined catchment information. If you choose the jurisdictional area scope, it's generally a higher total phosphorus reduction requirement. However, you can take credit for BMPs done anywhere throughout town. It doesn't matter if they're on municipal property, doesn't matter if they're on third-party properties. You can take credit for any BMPs done throughout your community. And also, you also do not have to do an extra exercise of carving out where BMPs are to do that accounting exercise. You can still submit updated land use information, but there is no need to submit any catchment information to further refine targets in future permits. Another reason why communities may want to choose just a jurisdictional area scope beyond ease is that the regulated area, urbanized area, may be and should be, depending on how the census does their mapping, a little tighter. So it could be a little easier to do BMPs, specifically green infrastructure, larger green infrastructure BMPs, if that's what you would like to do, outside of that regulated area. You may have land outside of that regulated area that'd be great to pipe some of your stormwater to in order to treat it. However, if you are only dealing with a regulated area, you cannot count that BMP towards your phosphorus reduction credit if it is outside the regulated area. So there may be some opportunities outside of your regulated area that you want to take advantage of, and therefore would choose the jurisdictional area scope. Another piece is that in choosing your jurisdictional area in year 4, you are signaling to EPA that there are additional sources within your town that are now no longer covered by a NPDES permit, and their discharges will not be meeting the TMDL. And there needs to be another mechanism in order to regulate those particular areas and ensure that we're meeting TMDL goals. Your final written PCP is due in year 5. And this includes all of the other pieces I showed you back in the phosphorus control plan schedule. So this is a description of all the structural and non-structural controls you're going to be using to meet the phosphorus reductions required in year 1, based on the jurisdiction or regulated area choice that you've just made. It includes operation and maintenance plans for structural BMPs that you are planning to implement for phase 1. It includes a structural implementation schedule. So where are you going to put all of your structural BMPs for phase 1 to meet your reduction targets? It also includes estimated costs. So you need to cost out all of the structural BMPs and non-structural BMPs you'll be using to meet your phosphorus reduction targets and provide an estimated cost in year 5. And this is where you would be submitting any land use change or catchment delineations with your phosphorus control plan for use in future permit requirements by EPA. Your phase 1 milestones that you're going to be looking at. So these are the 2 milestones within phase 1, and this is how you will begin to look at how much phosphorus you need to reduce in order to start to identify what non-structural and structural control practices you'll need to be implementing by year 10 in order to meet these permit milestones. Here we have, they're doing year 8 and year 10, P export, PEXP. That is your total phosphorus export from all your land uses within town. And that needs to be less than or equal to the overall allowable phosphorus load, which in TMDL speak would be your baseline load minus your required reduction. And then you add that to what the required reduction is, or PRR, times 0.8. So what that ends up being is a 20% reduction in your required reduction by year 8 and 25% reduction by year 10. Let's go through an example. So Bellingham has a baseline phosphorus load of 947 kilograms per year, a phosphorus load reduction requirement of 331 kilograms per year, allowable stormwater load of 616, which is a overall percentage load of 35%. That's based on all the land uses throughout Bellingham, using the phosphorus reduction requirements in the TMDLs. So for year 8, the export must be below 880 kilograms per year. That is taking the allowable phosphorus load and adding in the reduction requirement times 0.8, so a 20% reduction. That's a reduction target of 67 kilograms per year that Bellingham needs to reduce by year 8 after the permit went into effect. Year 10 is a 83% reduction, which equates to about a 25% reduction in 25% target of the pollution reduction total. So 83 kilograms per year of total phosphorus reduction by year 10. Those numbers are necessary for each community to begin looking at all of the things I mentioned before. So you want to this is supposed to be a comprehensive plan that you look at and figure out, okay, I've got, 67 kilograms per year by year 8, 83 by year 9. Okay, what are the stormwater controls are going to be needed to meet that? What are the costs of those are going to be within a range? Do I have the funding mechanisms in place? All of this sort of fits together in one big comprehensive plan to meet these two milestones. Compliance with this is demonstrated not through monitoring of BMPs or monitoring structural controls or non-structural controls, but with specific reductions and increases that are laid out within the permit itself and Appendix F appendices. So this becomes a math exercise. It becomes an accounting exercise where you are certifying that you're doing certain BMPs. Those BMPs are automatically given credit within the permit scheme. So when you're doing them, you are saying you are documenting that you're doing them and then plugging them in to different tools that we have, or just this large math equation here that's saying these are the practices I'm doing. These are the land use changes that I've had over the last year that would increase my total phosphorus load. So for instance, new development and new development that would increase your total phosphorus load. And you're coming up with what your export is in mass per year every year of the permit term and every year going forward after year 5. And so this is a lot of accounting. There are pieces here that you need to keep track of. However, we're trying to make this as easy as possible in that you're not actually having to go out and prove that every BMP is working the way that you say it is. And we have a very consistent way of demonstrating compliance with the TMDL watershed wide. So this is not a community by community thing. Every community in the watershed needs to be using the reductions and increases that are laid out in Appendix F. So there's a lot of things in Appendix F that are actually available for credit. So structural BMPs that are available for credit are laid out here in this crosswalk. This crosswalk was actually developed by UNH Stormwater Center, but it's available on our website. It takes the Massachusetts Stormwater Manual and crosswalks that with the EPA pollution curves. So, and tells you what EPA pollution curve you would be using to estimate the phosphorus reduction from all of the different practices that are contained in the Massachusetts Stormwater Manual that developers or municipalities are used to using. This is just basically a difference in nomenclature. And you can, if you were to pick any stormwater manual from across New England, they would probably name things slightly differently. So this crosswalk does a really good job of saying, you know, when you have a water quality swale that you've designed in accordance with the Massachusetts Stormwater Manual, you're going to use the EPA grass swale curve to figure out what your pollution reduction you get from installing that water quality swale would be. So what does that mean? Okay, so your structural BMPs are going to be installed in order to meet your total phosphorus reduction requirements throughout the municipality over the next 20 years. Each one of those does work. Each one of those is removing phosphorus from stormwater before discharge. And all of those stormwater controls act differently based on their sizing. So EPA in Appendix F has created multiple different, what are known as pollution reduction curves for different pollutants and volume for different types of BMPs that were in the last slide. So they're all based on the physical storage capacity of that BMP. And what that means is it's the total design storage volume. So you can think of like the volume, it's length times width times height. And a storage volume is that plus you need to take into account porosity of the material that is storing the water for that structural control. You take that designed volume of water that that BMP can hold at a snapshot in time, and you divide that by the impervious area draining to that BMP to come up with your inches of runoff treated or depth of runoff treated from impervious area. And using that, you can then use these curves to say, okay, if I'm treating 0.2 inches of runoff from impervious area in my BMP, I can go to the curve, go to 0.2, and go up to my total phosphorus curve and say, okay, I'm removing about a little over 50% of phosphorus based on the soil type, based on the type of BMP that I'm installing or stormwater control that I'm installing, and its designed storage volume and the impervious area that's draining to it. All of those are necessary pieces of information that are required to calculate an overall load reduction on a yearly basis from that BMP. What does this look like? So this looks like different types of rain gardens based on their sizing and based on soil types and based on the type of material within them. You can easily look on the curves themselves to look at what your reduction would be. So for instance, this rain garden was sized at 0.2 inches. It's in a soil that has an infiltration rate of 0.52 inches per hour. It's treating 0.2 inches of runoff from impervious cover that's draining right directly to this rain garden, and it's getting about a 48% reduction in total phosphorus in per year. You can, if you sized it larger, you would go up to a 0.6 inch depth of runoff from your impervious area, and you're going to go up over an 80% reduction in phosphorus per year. You'll notice that this is not linear, and that is important. As you get up in size, you start to lose efficiency for that stormwater control, and this is due to the rainfall patterns in New England. So we get a lot of small storms that all of the phosphorus that is built up on our impervious surfaces gets washed off readily in those small storms. And so capturing even the smallest storms and not designing to a 1-inch system can have really great effects for water quality and for treating stormwater. The idea behind these curves was to provide as much flexibility as possible in designing your phosphorus control plans for the first 5 years and throughout the next 20 years. So not having to design to a 1-inch water quality volume or treating 1 inch of depth for your impervious cover draining to your BMP allows practitioners a much wider range of options for installing different types of BMPs in different areas, installing retrofits in the built environment and getting credit for those, going all the way down to 0.1 inches of runoff depth from impervious cover treated. And that can be a very, very tiny control. But we need to make sure that we're giving credit for even those small controls and allowing practitioners to put in stuff where they can. The permit also gives credit for non-structural controls. So these are phosphorus fertilizers, street sweeping, and catch basin cleaning. You'll notice that there is no longer a phosphorus-free fertilizer credit in the final permit in 2016, and that's because we built in the credit for each municipality based on the legislation that was passed by Massachusetts. We may be revisiting that in the next permit reissuance, as that bill got pretty watered down and is not having much of an effect. So we may end up having to redo that phosphorus fertilizer credit in future permit terms, but that's to be determined. Street sweeping, there is a 2 to 10% credit based on the sweeper type and based on the frequency of sweeping. So a mechanical sweeper that you do once a year is not going to get as much credit as a vacuum sweeper done every week. And so there is a variable credit scheme in Appendix F that changes the credit based on how much and what type of sweeper you're using. You need to calculate the drainage area that you're sweeping and apply a loading rate to those areas based on land use, and then apply a credit that's inside the permit from 2 to 10% based on the type and frequency. Catch basin cleaning, you have to just follow the permit requirements, which are to maintain 50% capacity in all sumps. However, there is a need to calculate the drainage area to each catch basin in order to claim that 2% credit. We realize here that there is many more non-structural controls. Leaf litter pickup, for instance, is a really big one. Street sweeping probably can get a little bit more credit than it's due right now, and we should probably have a different mechanism for calculating catch basin cleaning credit. However, we recognize that non-structural controls here in the permit are credited, but they're credited pretty low and as placeholders for now. EPA is committed to looking at the efficiency of street sweeping, of leaf litter pickup programs, in order to refine these credits moving forward. And we will do that in every permit term. The idea here is that we're not going to meet all of our phosphorus reduction requirements by just doing non-structural controls. However, we realize that non-structural controls are going to be a part of every municipality's plan. So having really accurate credits for different non-structural practices is very important. However, it's going to become much more important as we move further into the 20-year implementation timeframe for the Charles River. The more credit we give for street sweeping or for leaf litter pickup programs is only going to offset or delay the need to put in those most expensive structural controls at the very end of implementation. However, municipalities and permit holders should get moving in the first 5 years by getting that low-hanging fruit, even though I hate that term. You know, looking for those places within the municipality that you can put in phosphorus reduction, green infrastructure, structural controls, trying to tackle as much low-hanging fruit as possible, and not waiting to put in structural controls to the very end of the permit term, relying on non-structural controls early. That will only increase the cost of implementation of the overall phosphorus control plan. And therefore, we know that we will refine these in the future, but refining them in the future will only save on the most expensive pieces of the program in future permit terms. So this is all math. All of it is an accounting exercise. The credits are laid out in Appendix F, but the appendices and its attachments are hundreds of pages long. That's there for a reason, and it's because we need to lay out all the information that goes into calculating these things, and people can do that on their own if they want. We've also been trying to come up with different tools to help permit holders identify and calculate what their pollution reductions are and what our estimated costs of those pollution reductions will be. The Opti tool is one such tool that we've created. It's all the BMP performance curves for all structural controls that we have credits for. It's built right into the Opti tool, as well as some non-structural control credits are also built in. So the idea here is that you would type in, have what your management objective is. So that would be like what your phosphorus reduction target is going to be based on your choice of jurisdiction. And then you would put in an optimization target. You would select like a different, what is your optimization target? What do you want to optimize here? Do you want to only put in certain capacity controls? Do you want to only put in certain types of controls? You are able to really refine your information, like say a community only wants to do this entirely with rain gardens and doesn't want to go over 0.5 inches of water treated from impervious area. Those are things you can put into this tool to try to focus in on where you can put these particular BMPs and how much it's going to cost. Part of the Opti tool, it requires land use information. So part of this there needs to be a GIS analysis done that feeds into the optimization tool. So the tool can then look and try to optimize where in town different BMPs can be placed based on land use information and based on soil type. The optimal solution will then come up based on your target and BMP information on what type of BMPs you want to do. It'll come up with what are the most cost-effective BMPs that you can do and where can you do them throughout town. This is a pretty intense program, I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of how-tos on our website, but the learning curve is there, but it is very powerful and comes up with many different solutions for the communities and focuses in on the optimal solution and will give you an optimal size of different BMPs in different land uses, so you're not oversizing BMPs where you shouldn't be. It'll also give you a general idea of how big you're going to need to make every BMP throughout town. If you want to only focus on one size, how big should you be making it? Should you be treating 1 inch of runoff? Should you be treating 0.5 inches of runoff every time you try to put in a dry pond or an infiltration basin, infiltration trench? What should be your target? And it comes up with multiple different solutions and tries to obviously optimize for what you're telling it to optimize for, either cost or storage capacity or type of BMP. What this really focuses in on, and when you run Opti tool, you'll see that it really focuses in on sizing implications. So it'll come up with thousands and thousands of different ways you can meet your reduction target, and their cost ranges will be huge, and that's because if you choose, say, to only install things throughout town that are 1 inch in size or treating 1 inch of runoff from impervious area, your costs for installing those size BMPs goes way up. But if you were to allow for variable sizing, installing things down to 0.1 inches, 0.35 inches in different land use types with different soil types, your efficiency will go down per BMP. You may need to install more BMPs, but your costs overall will also go down and you'll still be meeting your same target. So this is all choices that municipalities can make in implementing or coming up with their phosphorus control plan on how they want, what type of BMPs they want, how big they want them to be, how many they want, etc., to come up with an estimated cost for implementation. A slightly easier version is just called the BATT. This is the BATT. It is the BMP accounting and tracking tool, also available on our website. This is a spreadsheet-based tool that has all the pollutant curves for the structural controls from the permit built in, all of the pollution reduction credits that are available from non-structural controls at this time. And in this particular case, the municipality just needs to enter in the required information about the BMP or about the non-structural control, and it begins to create a Excel database for that municipality with a tool that exports the overall reductions and increases. You can also put land use change increases in here, and spits out a form that you can submit to EPA every year that goes through how much you have either increased or decreased your phosphorus load based on the structural and non-structural controls implemented to date. Again, both of these tools are available on our website, and feel free to try and use them. And we are always open to feedback. We just had some feedback from Cambridge that was using our BATT tool, and hopefully that came in handy. It actually came in handy for us because we made some changes based on that. Okay, I think we're going to leave questions till the end, actually, and I'm going to change it over to Andrew.
All right, thank you, Newt. Thank you so much. That was great. Newt covered a lot. Okay. Yes, so we are going to hold our questions until our Q&A portion of the webinar will be at the end, but please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box that you see at the bottom menu bar there anytime you like as you think of them so you don't forget them. Newt covered a lot. Probably each of Newt's slides could have been its own webinar, and hopefully CRWA will offer more training to come so we can really dive into a lot of that great material that Newt gave an overview of today and get folks a more detailed support. But please use today as a chance to ask your questions. Reminder to also feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, just so we know who's joining us today. And it looks like we've got our smooth screen share transition done. So we'll hand it over to Jim and Andrew to talk about Millis's experience. Go ahead, Jim.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Jim McKay. I'm the Director of Public Works for the town of Millis, and Andrew, we're going to do this in two phases. I'm just going to give a brief introduction of how Millis got to partnering with Kleinfelder for our enterprise fund. So when I came to Millis back in 2006, thereabouts, I felt that, you know, my background in working with the Boston Water and Sewer Commission for the previous 20 years, I had a pretty good scope of what stormwater management was, and, you know, the separation of CSOs and cleaning of catch basins and all that. That's what I thought, that's all we're going to do when we get to Millis. So when I came to Millis, I found out that, you know, Millis is a very small town. We have approximately 8,300 residents. We're one of the smallest towns around. We're up against Medfield, Medway, Norfolk, Franklin, Holliston, and Sherburne. And so when I came here, it was like, okay, stormwater is part of the interview. During the interview process, you know, your control is the stormwater reporting. And when I found out quickly that, you know, that was one of maybe 25 different reports that are due to the DEP, whether it's monthly, yearly, from drug testing all the way to a third-party inspection on your fuel tanks. So I learned very early that through the process, it was already set up that we had to rely heavily on outside consulting firms for testing and monitoring pretty much everything, you know, not everything, but for stormwater. So what our process was, in our line item, we had a line item just for catch basin cleaning that went from year to year. And that was a yearly thing that was done. We went out, we cleaned the catch basin through a private vendor. So those funds were there. And my light just went off, so I've been sitting here. Hold on. Live Zoom meetings. In around 2013, we looked to, knowing that phase one was, I'm sorry, let me go back. So phase one, we started looking at to start the testing and other reporting that needed to be done. We would go to a town meeting, whether it be at our annual town meeting in May or our semi-annual meeting in November, and we would be asking for funding to, supplement the outside testing that needed to be done, the reporting costs, because it was never actually put into a line item that was carried every single year. So around 2013, we were introduced, Bellingham, Franklin, and Medway. We were looking to join together under the first phase of the a water grant that would help us with the mapping and the procedures of stormwater. The town of Millis decided not to incorporate at that time with the other towns. I believe they went out and they did it together, and they started their programs growing. So we lagged behind, but during that time we were introduced to Kleinfelder because they were working with the consortium of the three other towns. And knowing that getting towards 2016, 2017, we got to start doing something because this is coming, and no one's going to let just little old Millis off because we can't say we can't afford it. And so every time we went to the town meeting, and I would present at the finance committee, I need more funding for more reporting. It got to a point where it was like, okay, that's it. You're at your max of coming back and asking for different type of funding every single time. We'll support it one more time, but you have to come up with a plan of how this is going to be moving forward through phase two of the permitting process, and how we're going to pay for everything that was just presented, in the previous presentation. So we looked at finding an outside source, and we found Kleinfelder, and they came up with the grant process for the water grant that first set us up for the ultimate enterprise fund that we chose to do. So we actually had meetings, public meetings, as part of the grant. We had several different public meetings with the residents, the select board, the finance committee. They were all part of it. We created a committee, and we met several different times through this process to come up with a plan of how Millis was going to move forward. And we ultimately came up with, during this process, I believe Kleinfelder was representing Milton, or maybe not, but Milton was one of the first three towns, I believe, that had created an enterprise fund. So I started reading how they did it. Milton's like Millis, but it's larger, but not with one of the big cities. So it intrigued me on how they actually implemented an enterprise fund through their and got accepted at town meeting. So we use that as a basis, and again, I started reading all how they did it and how they presented it. So Andrew is going to cover most of this during the process of the slide deck. So first I had to convince the selectmen, and let me go back. In the interim, we had to transfer. Our town administrator left, and we had an interim town administrator who was actually the previous. She came from Medway, but she was only doing it for a temporary basis. So she knew a lot about, why aren't we joining together with another town to get this process through? But Medway, Bellingham, and Franklin, they were too far ahead of where Millis needed to even get to that process. So we had a lot of catching up to do with the mapping and the first phases of the system. So when we went through the process, the first thing we had to, not convince, I hate to use the word convince, but we had to show that the select board that this was a viable option, that this is going forward, and we need to be, upfront and let's get this, process moving. And so we went to the selectmen first. They approved it. We needed a charter change, and I believe that's going to be talked about in the slideshow. That was first done. And then we needed a vote at the town meeting to institute the enterprise fund, which it was. And from there, it's been a great collaborative with Kleinfelder. I think that when you have a small town and you need to rely on, I mean, actually Andrew's here, he should have an office in Millis, because we rely so much on them. And it's been a great collaborative between the two of us. You know, we are looking, and they're training us to maybe someday move away from, you know, needing the support from them. And it's always been the goal of, you know, the select board, myself, to start training staff, which we've been doing that. We're actually in our third year of our enterprise fund. We're looking at, we had a credit manual that we put out for residents to file. We're looking to maybe change that in some ways. You know, we thought it was good at the time. Now we're reviewing those policies and procedures. We did vote in the select board voted in that we would not raise the rates in the first 3 years of this process. And it is, and Andrew will explain how, you know, the funds are calculated. So I think with that, I think I'll turn it over to Andrew. Maybe he can go through, you know, the slide deck, and if there's any questions for me at the end of how, you know, we got there and where we're moving forward after that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jim. I think with the remaining time that we have, I'll just try to highlight a few different important elements of the process that the town went through to implement a sustainable funding mechanism for stormwater management, especially given some of the information that Newt just shared with this group. Like Jim mentioned, in 2017, the town adopted a stormwater utility, which is basically a dedicated fund for managing stormwater and paying for all the different compliance activities and capital improvement and operation and maintenance activities that go along with having drainage infrastructure. That first process that Jim alluded to of evaluating a few different options for funding the town's program was paid for under a state grant. And we intentionally phased that first part of the process to have a number of different off-ramps so that the town would have options on whether to continue funding their program through their general fund or a combination of different revenue sources. But ultimately, given the town's goals and the long-term financial outlook, the town chose to implement a stormwater utility. During that first phase, which was grant funded and took about a year, the town accomplished a lot. They looked at their revenue needs, and they thought very carefully with a number of different stakeholders about what types of costs should be included in this enterprise fund, very similar to drinking water or a sewer utility. They thought about how rates would be set and who would pay and how much each ratepayer would pay. And they were able to see that the utility would be a really good sustainable mechanism for funding about $600,000 worth of investments annually into their system. A really large portion of those expenditures are for their existing team that's in town in DPW and across multiple different departments. I think during that first phase, the town realized how many different people and departments were involved in meeting regulatory compliance requirements, reporting, sending bills, and keeping their infrastructure maintained properly. And that was a really enlightening process to get people talking about the different components of stormwater to see how their role fits into a larger picture. And I'm sure many of those of you listening to this discussion would nod your head thinking that it does take a large team to do all the things that we need to do with our drainage infrastructure. Also during the first phase of the feasibility study, the town identified their priorities, and that helped to set expectations around what kinds of investment they'd make in their infrastructure, and how much money they could invest in their stormwater management program. They really realized that they needed to move from more of a reactive maintenance to a proactive maintenance to accomplish the goals that Jim was describing, meeting the mapping requirements of the MS4 permit, and also improving the drainage in certain areas that are prone to flooding. So that's the second bullet point about capital projects. And as a result of this stormwater management program, they wanted to make sure regulatory compliance was an outcome. So after this first phase, the select board and the financial committee really urged Jim and his colleagues to implement a utility. So we fast-tracked this process of implementation and really focused on education and outreach to the public. Anytime you implement a new fee, there's going to be a mixture of reactions from the people who are paying it. So we really focused on a comprehensive educational and outreach program to reach members of the community who would be receiving this bill, to make sure that they understood why and the benefits that they would be receiving as a result of this new fee. So at the bottom of the screen, I've just highlighted a few different strategies that we worked with the town to implement, from this direct mailer that's shown on the slide, to attendance at public meetings and presentations, to recorded video interviews with Jim and with members of our team to explain the value of stormwater management, a couple of different other presentations, and the credit manual, which provides not only an incentive to those who have already done the work to manage stormwater on their property, but a little bit of additional information about how others could get credit for the work that they're doing on their property to properly manage stormwater in terms of water quality or water quantity. So that was what was going on in kind of the front of the program, the publicly visible part. On our back side, we were looking at the town's GIS and creating a billing file and creating policies that would allow for the town to send bills to all of the different property owners in town. So the town selected a rate structure that that would bill property owners based on the amount of impervious area on their property. So we did a lot of work to refine that assessment using a desktop software called GIS or ArcGIS. And that's what this slide is kind of showing on the right-hand side. What state GIS publicly available files provided us in terms of aerial imagery and the footprint of buildings and remote sensed data for where impervious area is. We then cleaned it up so that it would be suitable for billing, not down to the square foot, but suitable enough so that the town could accurately send a bill reflecting its policies, really focusing on consistency so that ratepayers were not complaining about how their bill was different than their neighbors when they have the same amount of impervious area. That was a very big part of the refinement process. But there are several different routes for setting rates so that that upfront cost of setting up your billing file is faster. We're now in what I call phase 3, which is the ongoing maintenance and evaluation. Jim had alluded to potentially changing policies to be more lenient around credits so that folks who are trying to contribute to the stormwater management solutions of improving water quality and mitigating flooding are getting the credits that the town says they deserve. So we're doing a little bit of evaluation there to see how policies can be changed over time to recognize that good behavior and that stewardship. We're doing continued public education in line with the MS4 permit and some upcoming projects around flood mitigation. And really working with the town to provide training on new platforms that they're implementing with their asset management program so that they can sustain the process of sending bills on an annual basis. I think through this third year of implementation, we've really learned a lot. The town, I think, has received about 1% of the people that are receiving bills are either asking questions about it or appealing. Some of those are requiring a change on the billing file, and that's definitely to be expected in the first couple of years of implementation. But as we're getting to the third year, we're really seeing that that volume of questions or appeals is tapering off, and folks understand now the town's routine of sending a bill in the fall for this service that they're providing. And I think with that increased capacity in town to provide stormwater services, Jim's department is able to look at some other aspects of its program and has been able to fund asset management and flood mitigation work through the stormwater utility. We're about to enter our second year working with the town of Millis on their asset management program, which is partially grant funded. And we're also looking at other potential funding mechanisms to prepare for climate change and the effects that climate change will have on flooding. So looking at additional grants to supplement the town's dedicated fund through the utility. And we're also, I think, better preparing the town of Millis to start thinking about water quality improvements and the actions that the town will have to take to reduce phosphorus loading and pay for those improvements through the utility. So I'm really proud to have partnered with Jim on this implementation and my colleagues at Kleinfelder and a couple of other firms who supported this work. And we're looking forward to continuing to support the town of Millis with this work.
Great, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Jim. Really great on the ground, real life story there of how that played out in Millis. Lots of good takeaways from that, and great that Millis is thinking about climate adaptation and MS4 compliance together. Certainly an approach we support at CRWA. And our final speaker of the day before we move into questions will be Paige. Do you want to go ahead and take over the screen share, Paige?
Sounds good.
Excellent. Okay, great. Yep, we can all see your slides there, Paige. Great. All right, so I'll hand it over to you, Paige.
Okay, thank you. So Julie gave a great introduction before, but my name is Paige Dolci, and I work for Mass Audubon Shaping the Future of Your Community program. And so I'm going to be giving just a brief overview first of sustainable development and low impact development. And then I'm going to go over our bylaw review tool and how you could use it in your communities. And then I'm going to give 2 examples of communities who've used the bylaw review tool and since gone on to update some bylaws and regulations. So very big picture overview, traditional development, more impervious surfaces, more stormwater runoff, resulting in water quality impairments, public health risks, and infrastructure impacts. And this ultimately leads to financial and regulatory burden. Alternatively, with sustainable development, you're using nature to increase infiltration and reduce runoff, and at the same time, you're increasing the groundwater supplies, which is especially important given climate change and increasing drought. And perhaps most importantly, in this case, you're improving your water quality and intact infrastructure, and you're meeting regulations and saving money at the same time. So as I mentioned, we have this dual threat of sprawling development and climate change that can make the impacts that I mentioned before worse. So what do we do about it? So we can protect what we have, and we can develop smarter. So Mass Audubon usually takes a three-part approach to this: conserve, integrate, and restore. So conserve, this image on the left shows a conventional subdivision versus a conservation subdivision, which uses flexible lot sizes to allow for shared open space protection within the subdivision. And then integrate low impact development and green infrastructure design into development. So right here, curb cuts allow stormwater to flow into the bioswale and infiltrate rather than running off. So this can also be seen with narrow curbless roads, vegetation between roads and sidewalks, tree box filters between roads and sidewalks, and minimizing site disturbance. And then lastly, restoring local resiliency through low impact development and redevelopment. So the picture on the right is actually Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary, where I work. And several years ago, it was redeveloped, and they incorporated a rain garden, which treats stormwater runoff from our parking lot before it reaches the brook, so improving water quality. So low impact development, really quickly, development design standards that utilize plant and soils in capturing and filtering water while minimizing imperviousness. So it's treating water as a resource rather than a waste product, and you're managing stormwater as close to the source as possible rather than moving it elsewhere. And you're preserving natural landscape by recreating natural features. So you're getting a lot of co-benefits of nature, including improved air quality and mitigation of the urban heat island effect. And these can include rain gardens, bioswales. You saw techniques like these mentioned in the best management practice list that Newton showed in his presentation. And a great thing about low impact development is its diversity in its uses. So it can really be done at any scale, from the most rural communities to the most urban. Okay, so towns often come across barriers when trying to encourage more widespread adoption of these low impact development techniques. Because their local zoning and subdivision regulations reflect conventional development practices and discourage or oftentimes prohibit low impact development techniques. So what can we do about this? We can look at our bylaws in our communities. So making sure that your bylaws and your land use regulations are consistent with your overall community goals is key to encouraging development where you want it and discouraging it where you don't, in addition to encouraging the kind of development you want to see, like low impact development or conservation design. So the bylaw review tool we've developed assesses whether your community's bylaws, regulations, and plans reflect conventional, better, or best practices, which you'll see in the next slide. So changing these bylaws can help support the use of low impact development techniques as the preferred, most easily permitted methods for managing your stormwater. Yeah, and then a major advantage of this process is that it can help you identify low-hanging fruit. So positive changes that can be made administratively rather than having to go through town meeting or city council. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of our tool. It's very large. This is just one page of it. So you'll see the conventional, better, and best columns that I was talking about. And on the left, we have factors that we'll look at that contribute to each of our goals in the community. And then on the right side, you'll see where we would fill in what the community's bylaws and regulations say and rate them on the scale of conventional to best. So there are three key areas of analysis for the tool. So we look at overall site design. So is it open space residential design versus conventional subdivisions? 2, project design and layout standards in relation to low impact development. So road layout and width, curbing requirements, drainage, sidewalks, parking, landscaping. And then 3, maintenance and operations and mechanisms for enforcement. So who is actually responsible for maintaining the drainage and low impact development? And this also addresses inspection and administration systems. So if you actually go into our tool, you would see 2 different tabs. One's for an open space residential design analysis, and another is for an analysis of zoning bylaws, subdivision rules and regs, site plan review, and stormwater and low impact development overview. And this is where our 5 goals come in. So you saw in the snapshot that you were just looking at goal 1 and goal 2, and that's protect natural resources in open space and promote efficient compact development patterns and infill. And then goal number 3 is smart designs that reduce overall imperviousness, and 4, adopt green infrastructure stormwater management provisions. And lastly, 5, encourage efficient parking. So though all of these goals work to minimize impervious surfaces, which reduces stormwater runoff, goal 4 in particular addresses green infrastructure for stormwater management specifically. So the section looks to explicitly discuss low impact development as a preferred method, such as requiring roof runoff to be directed into vegetated areas, and a preference for infiltration wherever soils allow or can be amended. And some other things addressed here, in addition to rooftop runoff, would be site plan requirements, the siting of low impact development features like bioretention and swales, permeable pavement, a stormwater management operations and maintenance plan, and requiring a construction, erosion, and sedimentation plan. Those are just things we look out for. And here's another snapshot of what it would look like, what a piece of it would look like filled in based on a community's bylaws and regulations. So as you can see, we highlighted based on conventional, better, or best, and also provide recommendations, which you can't see right now, on how to achieve the best in your community. So now I'm just going to go into 2 examples of communities that Mass Audubon has worked with. So we received a grant from the Metro West Foundation to complete bylaw reviews for Natick, Framingham, Dover, Sherborne, and Wellesley. So this was Natick, and these 2 examples, Natick and Framingham, are ones where we did the bylaw review and then we ended up assisting more down the line when they were actually making changes to their bylaws and regulations based on the review. So as of October 2019, Natick had 6 impaired water bodies, and stormwater was a major pollution source. And 90% of Natick's private properties were not subject to stormwater regulations. So again, in 2016, we did the bylaw review and created our report of recommendations. And then in October 2019, Natick passed a new stormwater management and erosion control bylaw at the town meeting. And so Mass Audubon and various experts in the field helped them to update their stormwater bylaw. So this is just one thing that the new bylaw did. It changed the minor permit and major permit for parcels regulated. So previously, Natick regulated parcels that were greater than 40,000 square feet and did not regulate parcels that were less than 40,000 square feet. So now with the minor permit, it's required for 3,000 to 20,000 square feet of land disturbance, which covers 64% of parcels. And with the major permit, greater than 20,000 square feet of land disturbance for 30% of parcels. And then another thing this bylaw did was it helped allow for more flexibility for low impact development. So it allowed for an opportunity for applicants to use low impact development techniques and nature-based solutions to comply with the Conservation Commission's regulation of the bylaw. And then another example is Framingham. So again, we did their bylaw review around 2016. And this community has done a lot. Just among other things, they've updated their subdivision rules and regulations. So addressing best management plans, low impact development, stormwater management. And they've updated their open space zoning provisions that we also assisted them with a bit. So this included site plan review. So again, best management practice, low impact development, environmental impact reports, new off-street parking regulations. So incorporating methods to reduce parking space requirements, encouraging pocket parks, pervious pavement, more trees, etc. And lastly, the land disturbance and stormwater management section, which Mass Audubon provided some input on. So this did a lot, and I would encourage communities to look into this. But it changed the special permitting to by right permitting. It included regulations of stormwater management, topographical alterations, tree removal, earth removal and fill, new construction procedure, and a long-term land disturbance and stormwater management plan, among other things. So those were just examples of communities who have used the bylaw review tool and gone on to update bylaws and regulations, and potential communities to look to for examples and guidance. So you could look at these bylaws that Mass Audubon has reviewed and commented on, and potentially use them as guidance in your own communities. And so for the bylaw review tool and a set of 5 low impact development fact sheets that we've developed that focus heavily on stormwater management. That's massaudubon.org/LID cost. We also have a bit more on the bylaw review tool. So there will be a similar webinar by the SNEP network, Saving Land, Water, and Money with Smart Local Land Use Regulations. So this is with Mass Audubon and Devon's Enterprise Commission. It's Wednesday, June 3rd, and there is a link to register for it. So this is geared towards municipal officials or staff, or really anyone interested in land use and water quality. So you can get more of an overview on low impact development and how it's incorporated into new and redevelopment throughout communities to save land, water, and money. And you can also learn more about how to use Mass Audubon's bylaw review tool to assess and update bylaws and regulations. And on our bylaw review page, there is also a already posted webinar that walks through how to use the tool. But we are creating a new curriculum for the bylaw review tool that's coming soon. So we can teach others how to use it in their communities and not have to just do it on our own because that's limited capacity. So we are expecting to have that curriculum done in the fall or winter, and then we'll be giving trainings on it. And then another resource I just mentioned was the SNEP network. So this is training and technical assistance for stormwater and watershed management. The website is right on the bottom there, snepnetwork.org. This is a pretty new network that's just getting started, but it could really end up being helpful for you, especially with stormwater management. And this was a lot of information, so this is my contact info. I'm happy to go into any of this further with anyone or talk about bylaw review in your community or potentially review bylaws in your communities and drafts. Yeah, so that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you, that was great. Excellent. Okay, so we did want to leave some time for question and answer. And so we will get into that. Thanks, Paige, for great shutting off your screen share. Great, and all our presenters, if you don't mind coming back on video. All right, welcome back. Okay, so we already have some questions up in the Q&A box. This first one looks like it is for you, Newt. How would EPA and DEP like towns to document compliance with the legal analysis portion of the PCP?
Question. So in an updated EPA annual report template that hopefully should be out in the next couple of weeks, there'll be a spot in there specifically for Charles River communities to talk about and identify that they have completed the pieces that they need to complete. And so they'll be inside of that template will be where you'll be reporting to EPA and to Mass DEP on whether you've done it.
Great, and so someone actually did ask a question specifically, will there be a year 2 annual report template? If so, when will it be released? And Newt helpfully did answer that in the Q&A box, but for the folks that are watching the recording, do you just want to underscore when folks might see that year 2 template and how they will know when it is available?
Yeah, so we're really hoping to get that out in the next 2 weeks. We're finalizing it now. We had to update it with some additional space for those communities that may have been impacted by COVID-19, so that'll be in the template as well. So hopefully be getting that out in 2 weeks. When it's available, we're going to post it on our website, and there will be an email blast to all permittees that it is available for download.
Excellent. Thank you. And then George Saraceno asked a question in the chat. It looks like you answered it, Andrew, in the chat, but maybe we can also go over that one for the sake of those watching it on the recording. Or Jim, you're probably going to want to weigh in here. The question is, does Millis have a schedule and budget for their PCP?
Sure. So the phosphorus control plan was a large part of the discussion in the feasibility analysis, trying to use information from a report from 2011, the Sustainable Stormwater Funding Evaluation for the Upper Charles River. That report had information about potential costs on $1 per phosphorus removed for estimating, the reduction budget or estimating the implementation budget. We're finding in working with a number of different communities that the cost for implementing BMPs, whether structural or non-structural, is very variable and dependent on preferences and local conditions. So I think you shared a couple of different really great resources for how folks might be able to look at their own community and get a good estimate for the budget for reducing phosphorus. But I can definitely reach out after this workshop with a little bit more information.
Excellent. This one's really to anyone who would like to weigh in. Does any town, coalition, association have a good PCP template to share? I will just chime in that Charles River Watershed Association has done a few sub-watershed plans that do predate this very specific guidance from EPA on the specifics of accounting for the PCPs. However, they are structured very similarly to the way this has played out in Appendix F. We did a sub-watershed plan with the town of Franklin. At this point, it's probably 8 or so years ago. One more recently with the town of Bellingham, and we are actually currently working on one with the town of Milford. And again, these are sub-watershed plans. They're not, they're not town-wide phosphorus control plans, but we have structured a lot of that work very similarly to the way it's laid out in Appendix F. So we can link as I say, the one in Milford is not completed yet, but we can link the other two with the rest of these materials. But does anyone else, or Newt, have you heard any good templates to share regarding PCPs?
I do not. I don't have any information about who's got a good PCPs. If anybody else on the webinar has one out there that they've been working on, we'd be happy to talk to them as well. But I don't have anybody to share right now.
Yes, please. If any of the folks in the audience do have something they'd like us to share too, CRWA is happy to be a resource for posting materials and sharing materials. Okay, next question. When will this presentation be available on CRWA's website? It will likely be available, everything will likely be posted within 24 hours, I would say. So we try to turn these around pretty quickly. I know there were some great links in a few of the presentations and some references to tools that I'm sure you're all anxious to dig into. And so we will want to get those up quickly. Question for Paige. Is Mass Audubon available to review a community's zoning bylaw and various rules/regs? So I guess maybe looking for a little more information on how they would partner with you all to do the great bylaw review that you described.
Right. So, so for the FER communities I mentioned where we did the full bylaw review, we did it through grant funding. So the reason we're creating the bylaw review curriculum is so that we don't have to rely on a grant for communities to do it, and they can outsource or do it themselves. But we do review specific bylaws and regulations and provide comments on them depending on our current capacity. So I definitely recommend reaching out if you have one that you would like comments on.
Great, thank you, Paige. Okay, that is all of our questions that have come in so far in the Q&A. I'll just do a quick check of the chat. Don't see anything new in the chat. Well, I just want to thank our speakers again so much for their time, all the effort you folks put into preparing these great presentations, joining us today remotely from your homes to present. I know this is, becoming our more normal way of meeting, and it's unfortunate we were not able to do this in person, but you guys did a great job of recapturing that in-person training experience, and I thank you so much for your willingness to adapt and present here today and make sure we were able to get all this great information out to our community partners, because it is very timely, as Newt pointed out, very timely. This is information that we all need right now. To our participants, when you end the webinar, a survey is going to pop up. We really would appreciate you completing this survey. It should take you about 3 minutes, very short. Feedback is really important to us. CRWA is interested in providing training and being a resource for our communities regarding the Appendix F requirements and the phosphorus control plans. Obviously, this is a long-term process that folks will be working on for many years to come. And so we want to provide the resources that meet your needs and be supportive of what you guys want when we present these trainings. So the survey information is really, really valuable for us to be able to do that. Again, thanks to all our presenters. And with that, I think we'll wrap up and let folks go enjoy the sunshine. Thank you, everyone.